Good afternoon. Welcome to this afternoon's Halton Local Plans hearing session. Can I ask you all to turn your camera off and keep your mics muted? I will get back to you just before the inspector is about to join. Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Evans. I'm Lynn Donnelly, the Programme Officer.
Hi there.
Could I ask you to turn your camera off and keep your mic muted, and I'll get back to you just before the inspector is about to join.
Oh.
Thank you. Hello, can I ask you all to turn your cameras on, please, and keep your mics muted? The inspector will join shortly. Thank you. Hello, Mrs. Ross. Welcome to the Halton Plan local hearing sessions. I'm Lynn Donnelly, the Programme Officer.
Hi, Lynn. Thank you. Thank you
Hello.
very much. Thank you.
If you could just mute your mic, please. The inspector will join shortly.
Oh, just a second.
The inspector has joined the meeting and will now take over. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's now 2 p.m. and I shall open this hearing session on matter 12A, and in particular in relation to sites SRL3 and SRL4. Just for the benefit of new participants, my name's Caroline Malloy and I'm a Chartered Town Planner. I've been appointed jointly with David Troy, who's also a Chartered Town Planner, by the Secretary of State to hold the examination into the local plan and to produce a report of our conclusions and recommendations with regards to soundness. Just to double check, can everyone hear me okay? Thank you. Just before we start, in terms of housekeeping, can I remind everybody to keep their mobile phones switched off, please? Just to avoid any unnecessary background noise. And also just to remind participants that the hearing session is being live streamed as well as recorded and will be available on the Council's website after the session. Just briefly, in terms of our role as inspectors, our role is to assess the soundness of the plan, whether it satisfies the requirements of the 2004 Act and the relevant regulations. And in order to be sound, the National Planning Policy Framework states that plans should be positively prepared, justified, effective and consistent with national policy. You would have already met Lynn Donnelly, who's a Programme Officer for the plan. She's responsible for all of the administrative arrangements. So if you have any further queries, Lynn is a person to contact. Just in terms of the structure of the hearing session today, I lead the discussion based on the matters, issues and questions and the agenda, which you should have received, which is on the website. I'll invite people to speak at particular times, but if you do have something to contribute to the discussion, please use the raised hand function in Teams. Are you all familiar with that? I know the council are, but in terms of other participants. We ask that you keep your cameras switched on. Just like to double check you're not falling asleep there. But if possible, keep your microphones muted until you're invited to speak. Does anyone have any questions on the procedural aspects of the hearing sessions? Okay, thank you. In that case, can I ask participants to introduce themselves, please, starting with the council.
Good afternoon, ma'am. My name's Alistair Cross. I'm a Principal Planner in the Local Plans team here at Halton Borough Council.
Good afternoon, madam. My name is John Hunter. I am the barrister instructed to represent the council. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm Catherine Brinsley and I'm the Principal Planning Officer in the Local Plans team.
Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm Anne Moyers. I'm Policy Officer in the Planning team.
Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm Phil Peake. I'm representing the Highway Authority in the proceedings today.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Tim Gibbs, Director for Planning, Transport, Highways at the Council.
Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm Andrew Plant, Divisional Manager for Planning and Development at the Council. I'm the last of the Council's team.
Okay, thank you. And just in terms of other participants, Jonathan Behal, is that the right pronunciation?
It's Ian, ma'am. Yes, good afternoon. I'm the Planning and Enabling Manager with Homes England. I'm the Project Manager responsible for the Wharford Farm site.
Thank you. And Mr. Evans.
Good afternoon. My name is Guy Evans, Planning Consultant at Cassidy and Ashton, representing Liberty Properties in respect of allocation M8 land at Moor.
Okay, thank you. I'm afraid you're going to have to be patient until we get on to your session.
I was just going to ask about that, if there was any opportunity in terms of scheduling, as ours could be a relatively short piece, as to whether we would go first, or I'm happy to wait till afterwards and continue with the schedule as shown. But I was just going to put the question to you.
I take your point. I'd rather probably consider continue with the schedule as shown. However, there will definitely be a break before we move on to that site. So, and it's unlikely that your site would be considered before the break. So I shall leave that to your discretion as to whether you want to duck out. You could always keep in contact with Ms. Donnelly in terms of, when it's difficult to predict really in terms of how the discussion is going to go. But it would be likely to be after a sort of mid-afternoon break. So I shall leave that in your hands. But
okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you. I was going to suggest, though, Mrs. Ross, I am conscious that you have a very specific issue in relation to Wharford Farm, the Wharford Farm proposal. And you're more than happy to stay for the whole discussion, but I don't know whether you have any sort of commitments later on, whether you need to go early. But what I was going to suggest is that we could hear your concerns first before we get into all of the technical detail, if that would be acceptable to other participants.
Yes, that's fine.
Okay, just before we do that, though, it would be useful, just for my benefit, for the council, just to set out a bit of background to the allocation, and then Mr. Ross will hear from yourself. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, ma'am. The council sees this site as basically it's got quite a long history. It's been allocated or identified as for development or potential development over a number of plans. The site is in the ownership of Homes England, we believe, having been transferred from the former Newtown, probably through various iterations of the government agency. It was identified in the local plan from 1996 as safeguarded land, and then it was identified as a Phase 3 residential allocation in the Unitary Development Plan of 2005. It's now, again, as I say, proposed as a residential allocation. The site, we believe, has two principal ownerships. Homes England own the northern portion of the site, and the Peel Group own a portion of the site that basically wraps around the Wharford Farm Marina.
Okay, thank you. So that would encompass the marina part of the development on R39, is that right? In terms of the Peel Group ownership?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. We'll come back to the specific questions that I have on the agenda, but I think it would be useful just to hear from Mrs. Ross first, just to hear what your concerns are, and enable the council to respond to those or the developers. So if you'd like to start, Mrs. Ross.
Yes. As you know, I'm Mrs. Ross, and I live at Norton Crossing Cottage on Redbrow Lane with my husband, Howard, who's disabled. We are the only residents on Redbrow Lane this side of the track. And we have been opposing the plans ever since we found out about the 2009 plans in 2014 when I was looking for my local MP. So really, there's been a failure to inform us in 2009, therefore denying us a judicial review if we'd have wanted to go for one. Also, the Localism Act of 2011 was compromised because the council has still not informed us that, seeing as we're your direct neighbour, we were not even on the map. We were covered in brown. I contacted the council and spoke to Mr. Tim Gibb, who kindly came out to speak to us, and we started to talk about Homes England. Well, it was English Partnerships then it was Homes and Counties, and now it's Homes England. But this revised plan doesn't alter the fact about the failures, and it does concern us as C13, 76% affordable social housing homes and 26% intermediate will directly affect us with regards to our way of life, like keeping hens, breeding Oxford game cockerels, the wildlife, and our only access road, which is a single road over Burrows Bridge, and it's our lawful legal access way of easement, whichever way you want to put it, which would be compromised. Therefore, landlocking, and it's now affecting our whole well-being because it's been going on for so long. And we've been in contact with Homes England. We spoke to Jonathan and his colleagues, and being out to see us, kindly been out to see us and trying to sort things out, which is great, and we do appreciate it. We really do. But it just seems to be going on for us, and we moved here. I mean, Tim Gibb knows, and I think Jonathan knows, that we don't want any neighbours, because quite a while ago we had an aggravated burglary, and one of the guys that came in the house was a neighbour, and it was aggravated because they beat my husband up. He's got nose bone this side of his nose. I was actually and I'm only light. I'm only 8 stone, not even 8 stone, and I was picked up and threw through a sofa, and so I was injured. And this all took place in front of me 3 children at that time, and it just completely traumatized the whole family. So I really, I get a bit, you probably hear it in my voice, I get a bit nervous because I really don't want neighbours. And when we heard about the planning and all the housing, and I just can't, we just need to get out, really. And I know Homes England have been engaging with us and things, but with what we've got here as it stands, anywhere else to buy what we've got here, anywhere else probably would cost in excess of 500,000. We couldn't get another mortgage because we're in our 60s, and especially my husband couldn't. And I'm going to be retiring in 2 years because I'm 64 now. So we are at a point where we're really upset about it, and we just need things to be sorted out. And that's about it, really. And again with the access road, that's going to be a problem for us. So that's my main concerns. That's as us, and it's making us I don't know, as time's going on, we're just dreading it. And we look out the way. I know it's nothing to do with, I don't know, but when it's mental well-being, really, because when we look out the window and we see all these green fields, we just know that if there was house, we would. I can't have that. I just can't. We can't. And it's just, and that's basically what I've come on here to say, really. That I know the legal sides of it and everything else, but we've also got the human side of it, like our side of it, because we're only human and can't help the way we feel, and what this traumatic episode did to us. I mean, the men went to prison. Okay, I work in a prison. I'm a lecturer in a prison, so I do see prisoners, but we just can't. It's just we can't do it. We can't stab these neighbours.
Thank you, Mrs. Ross. That's obviously taking courage to come here today and to explain your position. So thank you very much for that. And obviously you've been through a distressing time. And obviously you are effectively a bit of an island there, aren't you? Surrounded by fields. And I can understand your apprehension and your position that you don't want any neighbours, and you're concerned about being landlocked. Just sort of, can you just explain really how you consider those concerns could be met or taken account of? What's the way forward in your view?
Basically, we would have to be bought out, and we have been in consultations a little bit with Homes England, because, like I say, we wouldn't be able to get another mortgage now, and for I'm going to say it again, and I hate mentioning well-being and mental health and all this, because I know at the moment people are all, but it is something that we couldn't live here with houses. We just couldn't. So we would need to be bought out at a reasonable cost. We wouldn't sort of say we want this amount of money and things like that. It's not a case of that. We're not sort of want to be greedy or anything like that, but to get something. And Jonathan's seen this property, and so has Tim, and to get something like this, what we have here, to get somewhere else, it's going to cost a lot of money. It really is.
Okay.
So I want some sort of. I know we're in talks with Homes England, but we just need some peace of mind.
Okay,
really.
Mr. Ross. I mean, from my perspective, I need to look at the planning aspects of it.
I see.
In particular, sort of from the local plan perspective.
I understand that.
At a more strategic level. So discussions about, you being bought out, etc., really very much out of my remit. So I'll have to sort of put those to one side for the moment. I mean, obviously you've mentioned issues in relation to, sort of right of access on the single track road, etc., which could be dealt with through the sort of detail of any potential planning application, and I shall leave that to the council and the Homes England to address. But certainly in terms of the potential purchasing of your property, that's really out of my hands. Yes, but in terms of how your property is dealt with in relation to the overall allocation, that is something we can discuss. So first of all, I'd just like to give the council a chance to respond, please, initially, and then I'll come on to Homes England.
Thank you, Ma'am. As Mrs. Ross says, we've met a few times in the past, last couple of years. Got a lot of sympathy for the Rosses' position down there, Crossings Cottage. It's one of these where there's a definite tension between public interest in needing new housing and the private interest of the Rosses there. The site of Wharford Farm is a long-standing plan allocation and has been since before the UDP, and then in the UDP, which is 2005, as Mr. Cross covered earlier. I think that the position you get to ultimately is, if the Rosses were to stay, then the relevant development management policies would apply, and obviously land ownership issues would have to be respected there. And by the development management policies, I mean things like privacy and interface distances with respect to Crossings Cottage, and also the Rosses' legal right of access. So I think ultimately that's the position you get to if the Rosses were to remain in their property.
Is the property actually within the local plan allocation? It is, isn't it?
It is, yes.
Yeah. There seems to be, just on the map, is obviously due to the scale, but is it sort of slightly excluded on the map?
Yes.
There seems to be a slight exclusion around that property.
There is, yeah. The allocation doesn't wash over Crossings Cottage itself. It just leaves it as white land.
Okay, thank you. And just from Homes England point of view, can you just sort of set out your position in relation to Norton Crossing property?
Yes, thanks, Mum. Yeah, just I'd echo the points that Mr. Gibbs has made, and just to clarify that Norton Crossing Cottage is excluded from the allocation boundary. We have, as Mr. Ross has said, we have been in conversation with the owners of the cottage. The most recent meeting back in February, but as we'll come on to discuss, the plans for the site, the illustrative master plan, that takes into account the setting of the cottage, and we've worked quite closely with the Rosses to ensure that there is an adequate buffer in place to maintain the residential amenity of that specific house coming forwards. I think just to clarify on the point around Redbrow Lane, it's obviously it's an adopted highway, and the extensive technical work we've done to date retains that as an access into the property, and the delivery of the allocation of the Wharford Farm site, it isn't dependent upon acquisition of the cottage. It's a matter that we're obviously in discussions with the Rosses on to acquire, sort of in the best sort of practice for placemaking principles for delivery of the master plan itself. But we'll continue those conversations privately.
Okay, thank you. I don't know, Mrs. Ross, does that give some comfort? If you've seen the master plan in relation to how it would affect your property and the sort of this proposed buffer?
I have seen that, but as I say, the proposed buffer won't. No, it's and also. The Redbrow Lane itself, that if that bridge was to be pedestrianised or anything, you would be actually landlocking us anyway. If it was to be pedestrianised, or we'd have no way of access to get out. But regards the buffer, we just don't want neighbours. I'm sorry. Even if the first neighbour was 30 metres away, I'm sorry. No, absolutely not.
Okay, thank you. Well, again, thank you very much for your contributions today. I have a good understanding of your position now. Thank you, Mrs. Ross. And it seems that those discussions with Homes England and the council.
Yes, there are. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's okay.
Okay, well, thank you again. As I say, you're most welcome to stay for the rest of the discussion. If you wish, I shall leave that up to you. Just moving back onto the agenda. The council's helpfully set out the background. In terms of how the council approached the site areas and dwelling capacities, can Mr. Cross just start us off on that, please?
Yes, thank you, ma'am. This is one of the sites where we didn't follow the standard methodology. I think the standard calculation would suggest a capacity of about 368. As this is a long-standing identified site, the site capacity that's traditionally been quoted for the site is 300. I think that just reflects that the site is currently accessed from the west over the canal, and I believe that Homes England is investigating the possibility of an access to the north through to the Sandymoor site. So I think the capacity or potential capacity of the site is very much up in the air at present. The 300 figure was seen as a cautious but reasonable estimate for the capacity. But I'm sure Mr. Behan can probably enlighten us as to the latest position in regards to thinking of the access arrangements and the potential capacity the site could support.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bean. Obviously, Homes England are now proposing a significant increase in the capacity. Is that right?
Thank you, ma'am. Well, we're at very advanced stages in the preparation of 2 outline planning applications, one for the Wharford Farm site and one for the Sandymoor South site, which is the next to be considered. But we're very much, as owners of the 2 sites, we're very much treating them together and master planning those jointly to look at their sort of joint delivery. Mr. Cross is correct insofar as 2 access points are proposed to realise the full development potential of the Wharford Farm site. The technical due diligence that we've done to date on the Wharford Farm site sets an upper threshold of 600 dwellings across the Homes England land, and set against the Sandymoor South site, it would be a further 250, bringing the total to 850 across the 2. So it sort of balances out, I guess, in a way when you look at the Sandymoor South site in the context of Wharford Farm as well.
Okay, and that increase is really predicated on the potential to access the site from the north.
Yes, so our discussions that are ongoing at the moment with the Highways Authority indicate that primary access would deliver up to 300 units. So to get up to the level of 600 required for Wharford Farm, 2 points of primary access would be required. And those are proposed, one at an upgraded new bridge at Burrows Bridge over the Bridgewater Canal, and the other one being a connection made underneath the local Chester to Warrington railway line, underneath the existing archway that connects through into Sandymoor South.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of the proposed increase in the density, Mr. Cross, on the Homes England part of the site, what's your view on that?
Obviously, subject to satisfactory technical appraisals and highways, we're always happy to see the increased densities within sites within the urban area.
Okay, thank you. And we will come back to the ability of the site to sort of accommodate that increased density in terms of any potential constraints in a moment. But in terms of the southern part of the site, the marina, which isn't in the ownership of Homes England, are there any thoughts in terms of the sort of capacity on that remaining part of the site? And it may be worth Mr. Cross just sort of setting out how it's envisaged that site would come forward, particularly in relation to the presence of the existing marina.
Thank you, ma'am. There's obviously no intention for the removal of the marina. The marina is actually accessed off of its own bridge over the Bridgewater Canal, and the Bridgewater Canal is obviously owned by part of the Peel Group. So I believe actually in terms of bringing the site forward, it's possibly interrelated with the Homes England portion of the site, and I believe there may have been some discussions between Homes England and representatives of the Peel Group in terms of the impact of the Homes England scheme on the potentially increasing the deliverability of Peel's land holdings around the marina.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bean, do you want to just clarify the position on those discussions with the Peel Group?
Yes, Mum. We are in negotiation, relatively advanced discussions with the Bridgewater Canal Company in terms of realising the primary access into the Wharford farm site and a through-route connection between the Homes England land and the Bridgewater Canal Company's land around the marina. I probably can't comment on the number of units that are proposed across their land. I think we're probably at much more advanced stages of the planning work across our site than theirs. But yes, we are in discussions and working well with that partner in particular to deliver on the allocation.
Okay, thank you. And that would help to facilitate a coordinated approach to the development of that site in the longer term. Mr. Cross, in terms of the capacity on the remainder of the site not subject to the potential planning application and the use of your sort of standard formula, if you like, can you just give me an estimate on the sort of the balance of the capacity on that part of the site?
Sorry, ma'am, I've not got the site area in front of me. I can, if somebody is able to identify the site area of the individual parcel, R38, R39, I could very quickly give you that figure. I can see feverish lookings up on the other windows that are currently open on the screen.
And the site performer has a site area of 6.59 hectares, but that includes the marina by the looks of it.
The land area, developable land area, is probably about a third of that. So just for very quick calculations, notionally, I suggest maybe about 52, 53, if we assume about a third of the area is available.
Okay, thank you. That's useful as a ballpark figure. And it's something that the council may wish to give a bit more consideration to rather than just putting you on the spot there. Okay, then, and in terms of potential adverse impacts and mitigation, obviously the planning application is at an advanced stage for the northern part of the site. What sort of issues has Homes England considered in terms of potential constraints and mitigation?
Thanks, Mum. Yes, so as I say, we are intending on bringing forward 2 outline planning applications for the Sandymoor South site, as well as the Wharford Farm site. And as part of that work, we have produced an environmental impact assessment, which treats the 2 sites together as one project for the purpose of the ES. So a robust technical assessment has been undertaken, and that identifies a series of mitigation measures, both site-specific as well as in combination effects with other sites in around the Daresbury strategic area. So the measures that have been identified are still to be agreed, obviously, with Halton Borough Council. We have yet to conduct pre-application discussions, but intend to be coming forwards with those quite soon over the summer to look at the sort of detail of the mitigation measures that have been identified through the ES. But I would say that the policy wording for Wharford Farm and the Sandymoor site probably go far enough as it stands to mitigate against the measures required across each site. Anything sort of further, more detailed, can be dealt with through the development management process.
In terms of the technical work that's been undertaken so far, has anything been highlighted as a potential constraint to development that needs to be addressed?
No, ma'am. Obviously the sort of primary highway access is a requirement to provide access into the Wharford Farm site and to realise the full development potential. But aside from that, no major technical constraints beyond sort of what you would expect from a site allocation of this size and the sort of typical infrastructure requirements that are needed.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Cross, just looking at the site performers, there are a number of issues kind of flagged up, including potential biodiversity action priority habitat area. Can you enlighten me on that, please?
Yes, thank you, ma'am. I think the said biodiversity in the area will be looked at in detail. I think as part of the wider Sandymoor development, there was a proposal to set aside an area at the southernmost portion, so either in the Sandymoor or in the Wharford Farm area, for basically nature reserve and biodiversity functions. Obviously, the site, the Wharford Farm site, is proposed to be crisscrossed by a number of greenways. And you'll see that the site immediately to the north, within the railway triangle, is actually a balancing lake. So that will also have ecological, or potentially have ecological value. Obviously, that's part of the water management facilities for the wider catchment, Keckwick Brook catchment area. So obviously, it's not proposed as part of the development.
Okay, thank you. And also the wooded part of the site, it's been identified as a core biodiversity area within the LCR ecological network.
Yes, yes, there's the wooded area principally between the marina and the railway line. I think whenever I said that, the proportion of that particular site that was developable, I was having in mind that the land down the side of the marina would not be developable, so it wouldn't be included within that area. Hence, the very quick estimate that only a third of R39 could potentially be built out.
Okay, and I also had a note that it was a green space, existing green space designation. Does that relate in relation to that section of land you've just discussed?
I don't have the policies map open at the moment. I shall just open that up and confirm. Sorry, I'm just, the grab function is not working, so I'm having to use the bars at the side. Yes, the green space notation basically it formed an edge down the side of the railway line. So effectively the wooded area that you've identified and a little bit of land looping around the top of the marina is currently identified as green space in the UDP. And there is, as I say, it does have a wedge going up a band going up along the railway line, providing a bit of a buffer. And similarly, there's a buffer band identified along the local railway line that forms the northern boundary of the site.
And obviously, you've alluded to the fact that the area adjacent to the railway line would be more than likely retained as part of that, part of any development proposals.
Almost certainly, if not for ecological value, certainly just in terms of the standoff distance because of the noise issues associated with the railway.
Okay, in terms of the open space study, I mean, it may be useful just on sites where there is a green space designation, just to, sorry to add to your burden of work, but to set out just a very short note, I think is all that's required in terms of the position, and relative to the new open space study, and how it could be accommodated in any new development, if at all, and whether it's surplus to requirements. It would just be useful to set the position out on that.
Certainly.
And obviously, in relation to this site, it sounds as though the scope to retain that green space within the site, within the development.
Given the location and given the nature of the development and the adjacent site was also brought forward by Homes England and Sandymoor, I think it's quite clear that yes, there will be areas of structured landscaping and the creation of new public open space for the benefit of the new residents.
Okay, thank you. In terms of contamination, I think this largely relates to the marina site, potential contamination, 33%. Has it been an issue in relation to the northern part of the site in terms of any technical work that's come up, Mr. Bean?
No, Mum. The site, by virtue of it being a greenfield site, is not considered to be constrained in that way. However, we are due to be undertaking intrusive site investigations to support the outline planning applications very soon. So, subject to the findings of those, we don't believe that there are any significant site constraints.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of the marina part of the site, obviously the marina itself won't be developed. Is there potential for contamination on the adjacent land as a result of that?
I'm not aware of the surrounding land being used as deposit grounds or anything. So, whilst there might be, I say I haven't got that information in front of me. But to say we can double check and provide a map if that would assist to show you the area that's identified as potentially contaminated, just to confirm that it is the marina itself.
That would be useful, and obviously it's something that should be capable of being addressed through the development management system. In terms of sort of any other physical constraints before we move on to highways, are there any other issues I need to be aware of?
As I say, ma'am, this area has in the past had complicated hydrology, has been subject to a lot of study. The balancing lake does form part of the water management in the Keckwick Brook catchment area. I say it's not proposed to be affected by this development. So I think to say in technical terms, we're not aware of anything additional.
Okay, thank you. Obviously, we've already touched on the potential access points, but in terms of sort of broad accessibility to services and accessibility of the site in terms of modes of transport other than the private car, can the council just sort of set out how accessibility can be improved as part of any scheme, starting with the council first and then Homes England.
Yes, thank you, ma'am. Obviously, I say parts of lower Sandymoor, the bottom end of Sandymoor, and the parts of Wharford Farm are not necessarily currently within 400 metres walk of an identified bus stop. That's partially due to the fact that the Sandymoor development is intended to have a loop distributor road that will accommodate, has potential to accommodate bus stops and bus routes. The development is progressing at pace on Sandymoor. However, the full road infrastructure hasn't yet been joined up, and as such, the site isn't permeable to buses, but it has been designed specifically to facilitate that. And I believe the Section 106 agreement, the long-standing Section 106 agreement, does contain provisions for trying to secure bus services into the heart of the site. That would therefore bring services within 400 metres of both the bottom end of Sandymoor and also with the connection under the railway line, even if it's just a pedestrian connection under the existing pedestrian connection under the railway line, would bring the Wharford Farm within 400 metres.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Boone. Do you have anything to add in terms of your thoughts and master planning in terms of how the accessibility of the site can be improved?
Just to reflect Mr. Cross's comments there, and to confirm that is the intention, to provide a bus connection through between the Wharford Farm site and into Sandymoor and the wider neighbourhood to the north. That echoes the SPD that's adopted for the Sandymoor site. Obviously, the Wharford Farm site wasn't sort of planned in that way, but through sort of master planning and placemaking principles that we're looking to instill on Wharford Farm, it will be to echo that of Sandymoor South, albeit a slightly different neighbourhood and with a different feel, but still connected through into Sandymoor. I think maybe just to pick up on the previous comments on ecology and the sort of environmental features of the sites, we are looking to enhance the east-west connectivity, especially across Wharford Farm. So the route of Redbrow Lane, for example, that will be maintained as a highway connection, as a pedestrian connection, and the wider links into the Mersey Valley Trail, for example, and through onto the Bridgewater Canal towpath. Those are to be enhanced through the development of the site.
Okay, thank you. We have touched on the access points, and presumably those two access points have been modelled with the increase in the number of dwellings to 600 in terms of the impact on the local road network, Mr. Boone.
Yes, that's correct, Ma'am. Just given the way that the area has been planned for a number of decades, the highway network is, I think, actually quite surprisingly from our perspective, when we undertook the transport assessment to support the outline applications, it is capable of accommodating the movements that would be generated from the sites. As I touched on earlier, when you look at Sandymoor South, in addition to Wharford Farm, the numbers do sort of average out slightly, so the overall uplift is not too much of an issue for the wider network. But the detail of the conversations that we're having with highways officers at the council, that's still to be looked at through the applications themselves.
Okay, thank you. And just to bring in the highways team at the council, in terms of those discussions and the obviously the proposed increase to 600 dwellings on the Wharford Farm site, and the sort of capacity of the local road network to accommodate the proposed increase. Can I just have highways view on that, please, Mr. Peake or Mr.
Yes.
Farmer?
No. Yes, ma'am, it's Mr. Peake. As I think we've previously pointed out, McDonald did some strategic analysis of the road networks set out in EL091. No particular issues were flagged up in terms of issues with the link assessments that were undertaken. And the rolled up into the East Runcorn study, all the mitigation factors that are included within that report sort of carry forward into these developments. So it's anticipated that the interventions that are set out within that study would be sort of funded and contributed towards by the developments in the area. In terms of work undertaken with the applicants' consultants, we were happy to scope the suitable transport assessment work that would be necessary for development of the scale, which obviously covers the number of trip generation, the sort of distribution of trips, and also the access strategy going forward. I have not been privy to the findings of that report, but it would be anticipated that it comes forward as part of the ongoing planning process.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate there's a lot of detail to be worked out, but in terms of the sort of the broad capacity of the local highways network to accommodate the proposed increased capacity to 600, do highways have any concerns about that perhaps could not be resolved through sort of technical detailed engineering works?
No, ma'am. Looking at EL091 and the information contained within it, there doesn't seem to be any areas that wouldn't accommodate an increase in number of movements. There's no reds or serious warnings in the localised area, and junction assessments further afield. Mitigation measures are either already planned or conceivable. So there's nothing within the capacity of the network that is that would stifle development as far as we're concerned to the proposed numbers.
And in terms of the proposed 2 access points which have been discussed, what's your view on those, and in terms of the sort of broad locations?
They're the access points that are available to the applicant to gain access to the sites. Obviously, there are third-party involvements in terms of the Network Rail aspect with the railway, and I believe it is Peel with regards to the canal overbridge, but there are engineering solutions that are available to the applicant, and as I say, from what we've seen to date, those access points should cover the necessary movements, especially if the development comes forward as a holistic scheme that allows for the multiple points of access and for the continuation of a roadway through to gain access from one and loop through the site and back out the other. Okay, thank you. So that detail will be worked out in due course through the planning application. In terms of the potential impact on the strategic network, is that the same position as with previous sites discussed this morning? It is, ma'am, yes.
Okay, thank you. And just to confirm, Mr. Cross, in terms of highways, in terms of education and healthcare facilities, is the position the same in this part of Runcorn?
Again, yes, it is, ma'am. As mentioned this morning, there is a reserve site for a potential primary school in Sandymoor. I believe the council has the option to exercise the right to take up that land for education purposes. I think it's until 2 years after the completion of the last house on Sandymoor. Currently, our education department do not want to relinquish that opportunity, but they don't consider that there's actually the requirement to take it up at present. And as also mentioned, there is a new free school. Sandymoor High School was developed in recent years in North Sandymoor, and EduBase says that that's currently running at 52% capacity.
Okay, thank you. So the land you referred to essentially being set aside, or so would be set aside for to be taken up for education use if so required.
Yes, that's a provision in the long-standing Sandymoor 106, and it's identified as site EDU1 on the policies map.
Yes, we'll be having a separate session on that site. Okay, then just checking my notes.
Excuse me, Caroline.
Miss Malloy, yes.
I'm going to go now. Okay. So thank you all so very much for listening to me. Okay.
Well, thank you very much for your contributions and coming along today.
Thank you. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Okay. Right. Lost my train of thought now. So just moving on to, if there aren't any other issues in terms of infrastructure requirements and costs, just moving on to viability and deliverability. Obviously in relation to the northern part of the site, Homes England are progressing that. Are there concerns in terms of the deliverability of this portion of the site? I'm aware that it's sort of being looked at with the Sandymoor site, but in terms of SRL3, are there any particular issues in terms of viability?
Is that directed?
Yes, Mr. Bean.
No, not insofar as the technical due diligence that we've undertaken to date. I think it is worth noting that we are, obviously, as the government's housing agency, we are tasked with the de-risking of technically constrained and difficult sites. So there's a reason for our intervention here, that the market wouldn't bring the site forward sort of itself without our assistance. So to that extent, we are anticipating detailed site-specific viability appraisal will be needed for both the Wharford Farm and the Sandymoor South site. We're aware that there will be not insignificant infrastructure requirements and utility provision to service what ultimately is an island site. So yeah, that's the reason why that will all be looked at through the detail of a site-specific viability assessment. But we have no reason to believe at this stage that the sites are unviable, and we will obviously work with the council and other partners to deliver on our objectives and theirs in delivery of the sites.
Okay, I note your comment that in terms of the whole plan viability assessment, on which we had a very detailed discussion, that the whole plan approach excludes abnormal costs for strategic sites, just makes a relatively small allowance per plot for 106 obligations. I mean, in Homes England view, what would the potential abnormal costs be in association with this site, over and above the normal 106 obligations?
I think, to be honest, we still have to look at that detail. We are at the point where we're working up the detailed site viability appraisals, but I don't think we probably don't have that information to hand just yet. It's a lot more clear cut on the Sandymoor South site, where the Section 106 is already in place with a roof tax style payment of around £14,000 per unit required for each plot.
Okay, thank you. But obviously putting the council on notice, there may be the need for a site-specific viability assessment to accompany any planning application.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Does the council have a view in terms of viability? Are you relying on the whole plan viability assessment?
The site has only been assessed in terms of the whole plan viability assessment. I think I would maybe just make one slight clarification, hopefully not contradicting Mr. Behan. I believe that the site came into Homes England ownership not through being identified as a site that was difficult to develop or required intervention from the National Regeneration Agency. Rather, it's come into their ownership basically as a former Newtown site. So it's probably passed down from the Runcorn Development Corporation through the Commission for the New Towns and the various other iterations that have now ended up as Homes England. So I hope you don't get the impression that the site has been identified as requiring intervention from the government's regeneration arm. I think it basically came into their ownership through the purposes of the new town.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bean. Did you want to respond to that?
Just to clarify that, yes, Mr. Cross is correct in that sense. What I meant by that comment was more the fact that we're still involved, and that obviously the sites have yet to come forwards and be delivered as part of the wider CNT land. As an agency, the fact we're still involved here just demonstrates the need still for that level of de-risking to still be undertaken.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of the viability and deliverability of the site and the estimated timescales and rate of completion, just to explain in relation to other sites, what we're actually doing is asking the council to prepare a sort of trajectory, if you like, for each site, which I'm hoping we can agree on each site in advance of going into Matter 17 discussion on housing land supply, to make that a little bit easier. So I'm asking developers to get out the crystal ball and give the sort of best guesstimate, if you like, in terms of the likely dates for submission of plan application, and ultimately start dates and sort of annual completion rates. So I appreciate that there will always be an element of uncertainty, but it would just help to inform our discussions on overall housing land supply. Mr. Bean, did you want to kick off?
Yes, Mum. Something we're quite used to reporting back to MHCLG, so we do have an element of crystal ball gazing, in hand. As we've said, the outline planning applications are very far advanced now, to the point where we anticipate a formal pre-application submission to the council sometime over the next couple of months into this summer. And alongside that, there'll be public consultation on the applications as well, just to pick up views from residents and obviously locals to the area. So subject to the findings and the responses that we get from that, we anticipate submission of the outline planning applications this year. And sort of following the normal process that Homes England would take to the de-risking of sites, once we've secured those outline planning consents, we would look to undertake soft market testing with partners and to refine a level of phasing and to understand sort of an initial approach to phasing of the sites before going out to the market to dispose of them on a conditional basis. So remaining involved with the delivery of the sites throughout until completion with preferred developer partners. Obviously, these two sites and Wharford Farm in particular are quite large. They have some extensive infrastructure requirements. So there may be a need for us to undertake some of those works up front. Clearly, we're involved at this stage with the ongoing discussions with the Bridgewater Canal Company and Network Rail to realise the access that's needed into the site, but other utility and infrastructure requirements that are needed, we would look to possibly deliver. So, but I point you towards the indicative reach trajectory that we've included within our submission, which at the moment forecasts Sandymoor South starting prior to the delivery of Wharford Farm, with a build-out rate starting from around about 2023 at 40 dwellings per annum for 6 to 7 years. Wharford Farm would run sort of slightly later than that, starting 2024/5 for approximately 10 years at an indicative build-out rate of 50 dwellings per annum. But as I say, it all depends on the market and the way in which we parcel up the sites. As an agency, we are tasked by government to ensure delivery at pace, and so that is something we will look to achieve through various forms, as we have on other major strategic sites like this. For example, modern methods of construction might be employed on certain phases, and we would also encourage SME developers to take on smaller parcels of the site if a quicker route to delivery were anticipated in that way. But it would all be done to align with the council's ambitions for the delivery of these sites as well.
Okay, thank you. In terms of, obviously the planning application isn't in yet, and you've referred to sort of the potential to need to carry out advanced infrastructure work. Would 2024 in that case be realistic start date?
As far as we're aware at the moment, yes, Ma'am, it would be realistic. I think this is where the crystal ball probably gets a little bit cloudy, and it would be very hard to sort of pin down an exact year for start. But 3 years in advance of where we sit now, bearing in mind the extensive work that we've done to de-risk the site to date, and our knowledge of the requirements for the site, I think would be realistic, yes.
Thank you. Mr. Cross, obviously the proposed trajectory from Homes England is rather more optimistic, and I think than your original trajectory for the site. On the basis of what you've heard today, does that sound realistic?
Again, yes. I say the basis initial again is the site without the benefit of a live consent. We basically said we'd have an 8-year lead in. Obviously, the works are advanced, and we're expecting an application shortly. So, in terms of the start date, given that it's a large site, we would normally assume 50 dwellings per hectare. I've just typed the figures into the table, and effectively assuming that the site does start generating units in 24/25, and I'm just assuming take the standard cautious approach of saying half delivery in year 1, followed by 50 per annum thereafter. The site would actually be expected to have generated all 600 units by 36/37. So the 600 units would all sneak under the current plan period.
Okay, and in terms of the remainder of the site, obviously not in Homes England ownership. I mean, have your discussions, Mr. Bean, sort of been enlightening in terms of the landowner's intention in terms of bringing that site forward? Have you perhaps spurred them into action to consider coming forward sooner?
Yes, Ma'am. Your words, not mine. But yes, I think I'd agree with that comment. Clearly, it is an island site that requires a new access to be provided, and the positive discussions that we've had with the Bridgewater Canal Company to date, would ensure a connection is made through to their land, and I think at the appropriate time and under the provisions of that access route being made, they would look to deliver out their site. We've had no conversations otherwise to the contrary of that.
Okay, I mean, would it be safe to assume, Mr. Cross, sort of phasing that part of the site later on in the plan period, given that there have been no discussions at this point other than with Homes England, and or with the council, and there hasn't been any sort of preparation work in terms of planning application for the site, for that element of the site.
Again, I would probably just apply the standard procedure that as a site doesn't have the benefits of permission, we would have apply the appropriate lead-in, depending on the number of units. If it was considered a large site, we would apply an 8-year lead-in. If it was considered a medium-sized site, I think we would apply a 7.5-year lead-in. But I don't think there's anything to suggest that the Peels site couldn't be delivered concurrently with the Homes England portion of the site.
Okay, and obviously it would be a smaller site in comparison in terms of the build rate. Yes. What sort of build rate would your standard formula look to on a site of this size?
It would be if the capacity is above 50 units. We assume, say, a 7.5-year lead-in and a 30 dwelling per annum build-out. If it's smaller than 50 units, we would assume a 7-year lead-in and a 20 per annum build-out. I suspect it's just going to sneak over into the medium size, so 30 dwellings per annum.
Okay, thank you. And can I leave that with you, Mr. Cross, in terms of looking at how that output would relate to the Homes England site?
Certainly.
Okay, thank you. So just looking at potential modifications, it would be mainly in relation to amending the site capacity. It sounds from earlier discussions, Mr. Cross, that the council would be happy with the proposed revision to 600 on the Homes England portion, and then obviously using your standard method to calculate the balance of the site.
Yes, we're comfortable with that.
Okay, thank you. Any other modifications? I don't think any have been referred to in submissions. No. Okay, are there any other points in terms of Wharford Farm before we move on? No. Just to double check, is everyone okay to continue on to Sandymoor? I was thinking it might be more appropriate to have a break before the Moor consideration of the Moor site. And I suspect this site may take less time to consider. So again, if you just want to kick off, Mr. Cross, in just providing a brief summary in terms of the background to this particular site. Before you do that, I think it might be useful in terms of how we approach the discussion at the session. Just to clarify, R29 parcel is within Homes England ownership, and that's the sort of you're looking at a joint approach with Wharford Farm. So it probably makes sense to take that site first. Mr. Cross, can you clarify the position in relation to R30? Obviously, it's got full permission. Is it under construction?
Yes, ma'am. It's I think that's under construction by Bloor Homes. They have had to put a new bridge across Keckwick Brook, but that's in, and I think the development's probably about 75% complete.
Okay, so are you happy to sort of park discussion on that site in a sense? Obviously, it's under construction. Mr. Bean, yes.
Sorry, yes, struggled to find the button there. Just to confirm, R30 is partly being developed out by the Moor, but the southern part of that is part of the Vistry site as well. So that is land that Homes England has disposed of to developer partners that is in the process of being built out. But it's 2 outlets.
2 outlets. Okay, thank you. And just again to clarify, position in relation to R37, it's got full planning permission. I think it was originally indicated as not having started, but is it now under construction?
I believe so, ma'am. I think that does include some sort of residential institution on site as well. I think when I was down there last week, there was a couple of cranes, but the housing development is built close up to that. So I think it's now nearing completion.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of those two sites, then it's probably not worth discussing those because they're under construction. But obviously, if the output of those sites can be reflected in the trajectory, that would be useful. So, other than R29, that just leaves R31 and R79, which I understand both of those sites are green space designations. But I think we can come back to those two sites. I think it's probably worth just focusing on R29 while Mr. Behan's still here.
Yes, certainly, ma'am. With assist, just maybe just give you a very, very quick potted history just to explain a little bit of the background, particularly regarding the green space, which I'm sure you'll be coming on to. Effectively, Sandymoor is a new town area. It was being brought forward by the former Newtown Development Corporation. The Development Corporation, or the Newtown, did bring forward a master plan for the site. That was then incorporated into an SPD to guide the development of the site. The distribution of the proposed development, if you have done a compare and contrast with the unitary development plan map, you will see is somewhat different. Effectively, whenever the site was being constructed, I think it was about 840 units on site, there was a flooding incident where floodwater got rather close to some of the new properties, a lot closer than had been anticipated, and that effectively caused a pause on the development of the site whilst the technical work was undertaken. The result of that was that it was agreed to basically rearrange slightly some of the land uses on the site, and effectively some housing was transferred from the proposed northern portion of the site to sites at the south, and the open space was transferred from the south and compensatory open space was provided in the north. Examples would probably be where the school and playing fields, previously they were originally intended as a housing site, and in the South Sandymoor, about in the UDP, about half to 2/3 of the site was shown as open space. I say that open space has been transferred to the northern portions of the site. The other issue that we had in terms of the UDP was the UDP identified discrete development parcels, and such is the way of life. They never quite come forward in the order or the precise boundaries as envisaged, and particularly say with the change of moving some open space around, it basically caused a bit of problems for control colleagues who were constantly finding that the housing was on open space and was contrary to the plan, and vice versa. So the approach in the core strategy, in the current plan, is we have drawn the site boundaries basically a bit wider, that obviously they will incorporate structural landscaping within the wider area as identified. So W29, I say the boundaries have been drawn to basically to the canal and to the railway edge, but obviously we are identifying greenways through the site, and so we expect that there will be open space incorporated as part of the development. It's just that I say it's not as currently shown on the UDP policies map.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you. Just moving on to R29. Obviously, that's just being sort of packaged up with the Wharford farm proposal. And Mr. Bean, you've alluded to the fact that the outline application would be around 250 for that particular site. Is that right? The reduced capacity?
Yes, ma'am. Up to 250. I think it's fair to say that the technical due diligence we've done to date indicates a lower figure than that. The site is quite a lot more constrained than Wharford Farm. There are, as Mr. Cross has mentioned there are ecological requirements that have been implemented on the site already in relation to northern parts of the Sandymoor estate. So Great Crested New Ponds, for example. There's also quite a large electricity transmission line easement that runs north to south across the site. So yeah, the outline application that we will be looking to bring forwards will be up to a capacity of 250. Obviously the detail of that to be looked at through further reserve matters.
Okay, thank you. And from the council's point of view, in terms of the revised capacity, would that be an issue for the council?
No, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Just in terms of the potential adverse impacts of developing the site, just in terms of my notes, the part of the site is indicated in flood zone 2 and 3, is that right? Mr. Cross or Mr. Bean?
Again, yes, ma'am. I see the flood maps, I believe, don't take account of flood protection. As I mentioned, there was an unfortunate flood incident in the earlier years of the development of the site, which was, I hasten to add, compounded by the fact that the site drains to the north through the Manor Park area into a pool where it is then pumped into the Manchester Ship Canal. I say the particular incident happened was that the primary pumps didn't engage, and at that time, unfortunately, an alarm went off in an office building somewhere in Manchester, and somebody got in a van, drove down to the site to let themselves in to manually start the backup pumps. And while all that was happening, the water level was rising. I'm pleased to say that system has now been automated, so that should the primary pumps fail, the backup pumps automatically kick in. I say there has been a lot of work undertaken in terms of technical work to assess the flood risk within the site, and I believe there has been physical works undertaken in terms of reprofiling some of the land within the site. In fact, I believe that the school playing fields have actually been dug down a little bit, and they are effectively sacrificial flood areas. So in extreme flood events, the school fields are designed to accommodate some of the flood water to protect adjacent areas. So the areas that are shown on the policies map are all areas that have been subject to significant technical appraisal, and they have been signed off by the Environment Agency.
Thank you. That's preempted my next question. I mean, just in terms of the technical work which has gone into the preparation of the planning application, what's that shown in relation to flood risk, and how is that proposed to be mitigated, Mr. Bean?
Thank you, Ma'am. Yes, just in relation to to the entirety of R29, from the perspective of the outline planning application, the site is in flood zone 1, so we don't consider that there is any risk of flooding across Sandymoor South.
Okay, thank you. And contamination, has that come up in particular in relation to R29 at all?
Not to date, ma'am, no. We do have, as I mentioned earlier, the intrusive site investigations are set to be happening in the next few weeks, so subject to the findings of those. But no, I think for all intents and purposes is a greenfield site, long-standing, that's been the case. We don't believe there to be any contamination issues across the site.
Okay, thank you. In terms of any sort of potential other constraints which could constrain development, are there any which that I haven't referred to, other than highways, for example, which have come up during the sort of initial site work, Mr. Boone?
No, Mum. Nothing again beyond the ordinary that you would expect from a site like this. We're close to the local railway line on an embankment there, so the requirement that's set out in the UDP is quite clear on the buffer distance that's required and the setback from the railway line. Equally, the transmission line. There is also a foul trunk sewer main which runs parallel to the canal, but all of the easements associated with those features will be applied and maintained through the master planning work that we've done so far. And just to clarify again on the highways point, a direct connection can be made already to Walsingham Drive. You might see from an aerial view of the site, but that was or has historically been used as a haul road for the development of the northern phases of Sandymoor, and all of that land is within Homes England's control. Sandymoor Brook runs through the middle of the site, and from the modelling that we've done, that is more than sufficient to accommodate, with the assistance of a SUD system, the surface water drainage requirements for the site.
Okay, thank you. And I think we've discussed the sort of capacity of the road network with the highways team in relation to this and Wharford Farm site. So in terms of the trajectory for the site, obviously you've set out there your position of a start date of 2023 and 40 units proceeding in advance of Wharford Farm.
Yes, Mum, that's correct. As I say, there is already a connection that we can make onto Walsingham Drive. I think it's fair to say that the more recent delivery across the Sandymoor neighbourhood has been quite successful, and we are hoping to continue in the same vein, bringing Sandymoor South forwards ahead of Wharford Farm, subject to the resolution of the various access needs of Wharford Farm, and yeah, the further technical work that we're undertaking now. But yes, an early start compared to Wharford Farm 2023. Yeah, progressing for 6 to 7 years, but again dependent upon how we go about parcelling and disposing of the site.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Cross, do you have any objections to the proposed trajectory?
No, we're happy with that. As you say, there's been a lot of development activity on Sandymoor. The site does appear to be very attractive to the market.
Okay, thank you. So if Mr. Cross could sort of plug that into your spreadsheet, I'm sure it's already done. Right, okay, well, I think that concludes the discussion in relation to R29. I think it would be worth just looking at the two parcels of land, R31 and R79, and in particular in relation to the green space designation. Obviously, smaller, sort of more isolated parcels of land. Mr. Cross, can you just sort of explain the background to those sites and how you envisage those coming forward?
I'm probably going to defer to my colleague, Mr. Plant, who I think has very kindly offered to field this. I believe the R31 is potentially actually already under construction, and R79 is subject to a current planning application, but Mr. Plant can provide you with the full details.
That would be useful, Mr. Plant.
Thank you, Ma'am. As was mentioned before, R37, R31 and part of R30 is covered by a planning permission from Vestwick and Galliford Try. This included on R37 a 100-bed extra care home. Over the whole of the three sites, there were 235 dwellings, but on R37, I've counted 89. On R31, there were 14 dwellings shown on that planning permission, and they're on site. The remainder of the 132 on R30 covered under that planning permission, so that's 132. Just while we're going through the planning permissions on R30 itself, it was mentioned that part of the site is again on site with Bloor Homes. That is 205 dwellings. So to go back again, my calculations for R37 is 89 dwellings and 100 bed extra care. R31 was 14 dwellings, and R30 I've calculated 337 as consented. Ma'am, there's also planning history in relation to R79. There's a current application in for that site that's not been determined yet for 48 dwellings. That probably completes all of those sites.
Okay, thank you. So all of those sites are progressing in some shape or form through the planning process. R79 probably a little further behind. And the green space designation, Mr. Cross, you've already sort of touched on really in terms of it being sort of a bit of a legacy designation, and you know in relation to the remaining parts of these sites, how would that be addressed in terms of provision on site and sort of reconfiguration, if you like, of the open space on those sites?
Yes, ma'am. I'm sure the open space has been detailed within the individual planning permissions. I say obviously the majority of the sites being referred to have the benefit of permission, with I think it was only 79 currently under consideration. As I said, it was possibly a little bit of a reaction to the problems that were raised with the way that the site had been dealt with in the UDP, with identifying discrete development parcels with the open space roundabout identified. I say with the change of uses on the site, it led to problems. So in terms of how we've dealt with the allocations, we have drawn the allocations widely, but obviously we anticipate that open space will be appropriate. Open space would be provided as part of each development, and obviously in terms of our assessing the developable area within each site for our notional capacity. Obviously, as I say, on larger sites, we assume that only 70% would actually accommodate housing, with the remaining 30% going for things such as structured landscaping and public open space.
Okay, it's obviously difficult without that strategic position in terms of assessing whether there'd be a net loss, if you like, of open space. But from a DM point of view, it sounds as though that's being taken into account through the planning application process.
Yes, ma'am, and obviously, as a development, whenever the previous open space study was undertaken, Sandymoor was, basically open fields. So for the most part, it wouldn't have been counted towards the supply, because it would have been considered as development parcels rather than open space. Just the fact it was open wouldn't necessarily mean it would be counted on the open space survey. What we will do, as I say, we'll provide you with mapping that shows the sites that were covered in the previous study and sites that are covered in the new study, and highlighting the areas of difference. Obviously, in whenever the sites are built out, the next iteration of the plan, when it's actually identifying the sites as primarily residential rather than residential allocations, will identify the areas of open space for protection at that time.
That would be really useful. Thank you. Given the stage that those smaller sites are at, in terms of the planning process and the scale of the sites, I don't have really too many questions. Are there any sort of particular constraints or issues that in relation to those remaining sites that the council want to flag up at this stage, which may affect, for example, deliverability? They seem to be all progressing pretty well.
No, ma'am. I believe that as it's a strong market area, there's strong demand. The area that was in Homes England ownership is more or less home progressing. The bluer site that was mentioned, which is part of R30, was land that was out with the former Newtown ownership. Again, that has required the provision of a bridge over Keckwick Brook or Sandymoor Brook in order to access the site. And that's not proven to be an impediment to the delivery of the site. As mentioned by Mr. Plant, it's almost built out. So there's definitely strong demand in this area. We don't think that there's any, we're not aware of any impediment to the completion of the remaining plots.
Okay, thank you. Can I leave the trajectories for those sites in your capable hands, Mr. Cross, in terms of reflecting what's obviously happening on the ground and in relation to R79 and the sort of potential planning application there, just to reflect your standard sort of formula, if you like, for the output on that site. That would be really useful. So yes, I don't have any further questions in terms of the Sandymoor site, unless anybody's got any further points. Okay, thank you. Well, obviously we will need to adjourn again just for a short break and come back. Can I say about 10 to 4 to discuss the site at Moor? And thank you, Mr. Bean, for your contributions today. Thank you. Hello everyone, welcome back. Did I say 10-2 or 5-2? I'm beginning to wonder now.
I believe you said 10-2.
10-2, okay. Oh, everyone's coming through now. Perhaps should have allowed a little bit longer. Okay, do we have everyone here now? Is Mr. Cross here? I'll just give a few more minutes. Just while we're waiting, I'm just going to rejoin the session because I've got a bit of a technical issue here, but I shall be back. It's okay. Resolved that issue. Is Mr. Cross back? Are we expecting Mr. Cross?
We'll send an internal message just to check on his whereabouts.
Okay, thank you. No problem. Hello, Mr. Cross. We were getting worried about you there for a moment.
Apologies, I think the clocks are on Royston Vasey time. I do apologise.
I was beginning to wonder what time I said we'd return by. Okay, just to welcome Mr. Evans back, and thank you for your patience in hanging on to the end of the session. I didn't want to keep Mr. Ross sort of waiting there. Just in terms of, sorry, my printer's going off in the background. Just in relation to M8 in Moor, Land East of Runcorn Road. Mr. Cross, now you're back with us. Can you just give us a brief introduction to the background of the site, please?
Yeah, certainly, ma'am. Basically, the site was identified as a potential release from the Green Belt and the previous iteration of the local plan. the publication draft Reg 18. Effectively, that plan, with looking at the higher housing requirement, identified significantly more land to be taken out of the greenbelt to be allocated for residential purposes. So there were substantial proposals around Moor. With the reduction in the overall housing requirement and the more up-to-date housing supply position, it was felt that those allocations were no longer required. As we are redrawing the greenbelt boundary, effectively, and we're looking to take Moor out of the greenbelt in accordance with NPPF Para 139B. We did look at the settlement boundary, which effectively is the settlement boundary of Runcorn, not just it's not an inset boundary for Moor alone. And N8 was basically a clear indent in the proposed greenbelt boundary. Effectively, that small portion of the site would be surrounded on three sides by residential, and it was considered would serve no greenbelt purpose and was an obvious rounding site. So the proposal was that the proposal to remove the land or the further portion of the site south of this from the greenbelt was abandoned, and the site is now proposed to be retained. This particular site, M8, was decided was an obvious rounding opportunity and effectively a small infill site on the edge of Moor. It's assessed as having a capacity. I think there's a slight disagreement between the published plan and the assessment, which will just be down to a rounding error. I think the published plan says 20 units. I think my statement says 19, but I say it's all just be a rounding error in terms of the site area.
Okay, thank you. And as in previous sessions, in terms of the sort of stepping back, if you like, from the site, what factors were decisive in that decision? And obviously in relation to other sites in the local plan, as pointed out by Mr. Evans, and on other occasions when the council's pulled back from a site, they've looked at allocating the sort of part of that site for safeguarded land, and was that considered as part of your deliberations?
Yes, ma'am. This is probably, I say, it's one that's just come down to planning judgment in terms of, I say, possibly the semantics between the notations on the map and the perception on the ground. I'm assuming you may have travelled the route between Sandymoor and Moor Village whenever you've been on your travels around Runcorn. In fact, I forgot to ask, did you get lost?
I actually had a sat nav, so I didn't get lost, but it did lead me down some spurious roads like Redbrow Lane, where I kind of had to reverse back out. I realised I couldn't get through.
Well, if you manage not to turn in to try and drive down the busway, you're certainly one up on me. That's certainly a trick that I've managed.
Oh, I did drive down a busway at one point. I haven't had a ticket yet. I'm hoping there weren't any cameras.
But sorry, as an aside, I say if you come from Sandymoor heading out towards Moor Village, obviously I say the proposal that's in front of you just now is effectively taking the land to the north of Warrington Road out of the greenbelt. Effectively, you have ribbon development on the left-hand side as you're heading away from Sandymoor towards Moor Village. You've got the linear park immediately behind that housing, and I believe that linear park was actually one of the features that was paid for from the Sandymoor 106 monies. And then you have obviously the employment area, Manor Park, including the employment proposed allocations behind that. As you're heading out, however, you've got the residential on one side and you have what's currently greenfields on the other side. And so effectively you do still have the slight perception that Moor is still a standalone settlement. And the decision was taken effectively that if we were to retain the housing allocation or retain safeguarded land on the land, the remaining part of what was previously M8. If you were to proposed development on that other side of the road, then effectively you would be losing the character of Moor in terms of the approach. It wouldn't feel like a separate settlement anymore, because there would be continuous development on both sides of the road. As you come from Sandymoor, basically be an extension. It would feel more like an extension of Runcorn, rather than retaining a bit of its perception and the character as a standalone village. So it was very much a judgment call. I say that was the rationale behind the not retaining it safeguarded, but actually proposing to retain the bulk of the site for Greenbelt. And I think I've explained why. That we came to the different view on the small portion that's currently M8 and the plan in front of you.
Okay, thank you very much for that that background. Can I just bring Mr. Evans in at this point in terms of the sort of the history of the site, and obviously the change in the site allocation area from this publication draft to the submission draft. Did you have anything to add to that in terms of what Mr. Cross has said?
Thank you, Ma'am. Yes, just in terms of the original allocation, we fully appreciate that there was a major change in terms of national policy in terms of housing figures and their calculation, and can appreciate that some sites had to be reconsidered in terms of the release of land from the Greenbelt. And it's interesting to hear Mr. Cross's reference there in terms of the judgment being made as to what sites in this particular location, because as he says, there was a much larger extent of land that was deemed to be acceptable for release from the Greenbelt within the location of Moor, for quite a considerable number of units, and for that to be reduced essentially to one standalone pocket of 20 units, it does seem a rather sizable reduction in our view, but we appreciate that through the Greenbelt assessment, certain sites are considered and judged against others. I'm not going to go into that debate about which sites are better than others. I appreciate that's not the forum for today, and we set that out for you quite clearly within our hearing statement in advance of this session. We do feel that a wider extent of land in terms of an allocation M8 is still appropriate in this location, not only on its own merits, but also in consideration against some of the other standalone sites that have been released from the Greenbelt, namely those others that you are due to consider, I believe, in terms of D1, P1 and P2 in particular. The query we really have, obviously we support the allocation as shown currently for M8, and we'd be foolish not to in current circumstance, but the question does lie how that judgment was made in terms of the reduction to the parcel as shown, particularly with reference to the original Greenbelt land review and the original assessments with reference to the parcel that was referenced GB294, to which the current allocation as shown as M8 formed probably a quarter of that overall parcel, and we are talking about a parcel of land that is in one single land ownership. And with reference to that parcel, in terms of its overall contribution to the Greenbelt, it was referenced as only making a partial contribution and considered to have very limited impact on the resultant gap between settlements. So you can appreciate where we do feel where that judgment was made in terms of why the whole of the original parcel, at least as referenced GB294, was not considered in terms of the allocation. And I understand Mr. Cross's reference to the appreciation of Moor as a standalone village, but from travelling to that area on a number of occasions as I have, I do feel that as soon as you hit Runcorn Road and travelling from the Sandymoor area, with the extent of the linear development on the western side of Runcorn Road, that does, in our view, feel as if it's the start of the entrance to Moor, as opposed to before you hit it in its main centre towards the church and the school. And you have a very clear, definable boundary to the east, which is the railway line.
Okay, thank you. I mean, in terms of consistency, I raised this yesterday. Obviously, our role is to consider the soundness of the plan as submitted and the sites as submitted. So we will be focusing on that today. And we will be going through the sort of the Greenbelt assessment in terms of looking at the effective development on that parcel of land on the purposes of the Greenbelt. But just Mr. Cross, in terms of the existing scale of the settlement, how do you consider that the revised allocation is more appropriate in terms of the existing size of the settlement as compared to the previous allocation?
Thank you, ma'am. I say, in terms of, I don't know whether you have have sight of the policies map from the previous Reg 18 consultation. Obviously, as I say, whenever the amount of land that was being identified, it was very substantial. It effectively completely subsumed the village. We were looking at the potential release of land both between the village and Runcorn proper, and also on the other side heading out towards the boundary with Warrington. Obviously, as touched upon, say Warrington's looking at their own proposals coming in the opposite direction. In terms of the remaining M8, it's principally, I say, it's just because when drawing the Greenbelt boundary, it would be a clear indent. It would have housing on residential on three sides, notwithstanding the railway in between. So it was just felt that, effectively that small portion would not serve any Greenbelt function. It would be a logical Greenbelt boundary to draw the boundary round to subsume M8, and therefore it was felt it was appropriate to use the existing boundary across the site to Warrington Road. Runcorn Road, in order to define a strong defensible Greenbelt boundary in this location. In terms of the total number of units, yes, I mean it's 20 units as opposed to several hundred that was proposed previously. I say the previous proposals would have effectively subsumed the whole of the village into the wider urban forum. So we do feel it is more appropriate, and I don't think we have an objection at this stage regarding housing from the parish council. So I think the parish council are obviously somewhat relieved that we've been able to scale back the development proposals in this locality.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of the development capacity, obviously it's identified for 20 dwellings. And assume that's been based on your standard formulation, Mr. Cross. In terms of the site as it is proposed, is that sort of capacity acceptable to the developer, Mr. Evans?
Simple answer is yes. In terms of our extensive background work that's already been done for for the site as a whole and not just the area as shown in terms of the current proposed allocation. The master planning exercise that we have undertaken has shown that area of the site to appropriately accommodate. I believe our figures actually were 22 units as opposed to 20, but yeah, we're talking a small change in the number of units.
Okay, thank you. And obviously it's a notional capacity identified in the plan.
Correct.
As with previous sites, what we've tended to do is go through the Greenbelt assessment and look at the contribution that the site makes in its current form to the Greenbelt purposes. Obviously, as you say, it's identified as Greenbelt parcel 294. And so, Mr. Cross, can you just summarise the Greenbelt study in terms of purpose 1, checking the unrestricted sprawl, and what it concluded in relation to this site?
Yeah, sorry, ma'am. I say in terms of the Greenbelt gap, I see there's a little bit of a difficult trouble. You have to sort of zoom out in your mind a little bit in terms of this site, because obviously I see the proposal for the land at the other side of the road at the back of the existing housing is not Greenbelt. So effectively, the gap is, it's tucked behind Moor. So the gap to the nearest other town, Warrington, we have Moor Village intervening in between. And I say it's not a standalone, so it's not proposed to be a standalone inset village. So the gap to Runcorn is, it's basically it's part of the same settlement boundary. So it's a bit of a misnomer to calculate that in this location. However, obviously, as I say, yes, the gap between, I say, Moor Village and the Sandymoor and Runcorn proper, I say this is seen as, effectively the assessment as originally carried out, looked at a larger parcel which would effectively substantially close the gap. What's being proposed now, as I said, is probably more the perceptual gap rather than the physical gap. And so we see it now as effectively being a small parcel that serves little to no Greenbelt function. I say it's entirely contained, it's largely contained. It has development on sort of 70-75% of the exterior boundaries. It won't cause perception, particularly of closing the gap to the nearest settlement, albeit that the nearest settlement is within the same settlement boundary.
Okay, and it's sort of fairly well surrounded, and in terms of visual encroachment to the site as well. And as you say, the overall summary was that the site the wider site made a partial contribution to purposes of Greenbelt. In terms of the smaller parcel of land, would you, just taking account your comments there, would you consider it still makes a partial contribution or more limited contribution?
I would say it makes a very limited contribution to the purposes, including land within the Greenbelt. It's clearly an indent into the urban boundary. It's a clear rounding opportunity, and it was identified as such.
In terms of the larger parcel of land, just bearing in mind Mr. Evans' suggestion, would you still consider the larger parcel as a whole would be partial contribution to Greenbelt purposes?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Evans, in terms of the contribution which the site makes to Greenbelt purposes, do your client agree with the assessment? And Mr. Cross's sort of on the hoof assessment in terms of the smaller site?
Yes, I think we've obviously raised raised the point in terms of the consideration of the wider parcel GB294 as only a partial contribution, and just referring back to the council's own Greenbelt review and their own assessment of sites and the function that they actually serve in terms of Greenbelt. It's interesting that this area was included within the wider area to the east as a grouped site, and so in terms of it being considered as a grouped site, it was deemed to have a partial contribution to the Greenbelt function. But the land directly to the west was deemed to have a limited contribution. We are of the view that actually this site is better served with the land to the west, and hence, because of the railway line providing the natural boundary, and hence, in our view, as a whole, it still only provides a limited contribution to Greenbelt function.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Cross, did you want to respond to that?
Sorry, the land to the west, would that be the land behind the housing on the western side of Runcorn Road? As I say, that's the linear park, and then into Manor Park employment area.
Yes.
Again, obviously, I say the Greenbelt as drawn previously didn't subsume the whole of Moor. It did include, as you say, the linear park. The council views that the linear park is obviously an urban feature, and is basically recommending that be now identified as within the settlement boundary for wider Runcorn. As I say, it's difficult to deal with Moor, I say, obviously, because it isn't a standalone settlement. It has been proposed to be subsumed within the settlement boundary for Runcorn. However, it does have the feel of a separate settlement, hence, as mentioned, in terms of the perception before. And obviously, we are proposing some employment allocations to the rear of the village, the majority of which are actually on sites that were previously identified as open countryside, not identified as Greenbelt, although there are small areas that were previously identified as Greenbelt. So they say the land to the west, I say yes, performs little to no Greenbelt function. It's got employment, large sheds on one side. It's got the urban feature of the linear park and the housing on the other side. So it clearly has very limited function.
Okay, thank you. And in terms of the effect of potential development on the purposes of the Greenbelt, Mr. Cross, do you want to start us off?
Yes, again, as I say, it's the site is very modest in scale. It's a clear rounding of the urban form, so I would say it would have negligible impact on the remaining land that's proposed to be retained within the Greenbelt.
Mr. Evans?
We would agree with the council's own assessment in terms of only a very limited impact.
Okay, thank you. In terms of compensatory improvements to offset the loss of Greenbelt, obviously it is a smaller site. So what potential is there to accommodate any compensatory improvements? Mr. Cross first, please.
Yes, thank you, ma'am. Again, they say the site's very modest. It performs very little Greenbelt function. We wouldn't see there would be any substantive need for compensatory measures, the loss is very minor. So the compensatory measures would probably be equally so. It does provide the opportunity to strengthen the boundary. As I say, as there is a boundary across the site, it's not particularly strong. So the opportunity would be to create a stronger boundary between this site and the remaining portion of the previous site.
Mr. Evans, would you agree with that?
Yes, we would.
Okay, thank you. In terms of exceptional circumstances to alter the green belt, obviously there's the strategic need. Are there any site-specific factors, Mr. Cross, which come into play in terms of exceptional circumstances?
Again, I think in terms of this particular site, I see the reason that it is being proposed is that in the Greenbelt Review, obviously with regard to MPPF 139B, which clearly states that we shouldn't retain land in the Greenbelt that's not necessary to retain as open. Under that provision, obviously, we've looked at the Moor Village, which is currently washed over by the Greenbelt notation in the Unitary Development Plan. We feel that that is contrary to current MPPF guidance, and as such, we've sought to identify the settlement boundary around the village in order to identify it, to take the village out of the Greenbelt and to identify a strong boundary. This site is, I say, it's an obvious anomaly. If we were to include this within the Greenbelt, it would be including a site that serves effectively no Greenbelt function and therefore is not required to be kept open in terms of the Greenbelt. So I say the exceptional circumstances, particularly in relation to this site, are that it's a rounding opportunity, and in some degree, in terms of the proposed settlement boundary, its inclusion within the Greenbelt would be perverse.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Evans.
Nothing really further to add there, other than clearly the exceptional circumstances is intrinsically linked with the strategic policy in terms of housing requirements. I appreciate you've had that session in terms of the examination, and you've had a number of other parties make their own representations accordingly. So I won't go over that ground.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other points in terms of Greenbelt before we move on? No. Just in terms of the potential adverse impacts of development, I note that there's a Grade 2 listed building within 50 metres of the boundary of the site, Mr. Cross.
Yes, ma'am. That relates to a cottage that's actually further down Runcorn Road from the site. So the 50 metres relates to the original boundary as assessed, but it is towards the southern or western end of Runcorn Road, so the distance is probably slightly more. Again, we wouldn't see that the development of this site would in any way impact upon that listed building. There is a couple of listed buildings a bit further into Moor, which I think are actually located within the conservation area. Again, I say there is intervening development between this site and those properties, so we don't envisage that the development of this site would detrimentally impact on the heritage assets.
Okay, thank you. And the conservation area is sort of quite far from the site, so I envisage there wouldn't be any issues in terms of the effect on the conservation area either.
No, there's an intervening I think it's looks suspiciously like 1970s properties in between, just located on the other side of the railway line from this site. So I say the development here shouldn't have any impact.
Okay, thank you. I mean, in terms of these, in terms of the constraints, I'm probably going off the larger site boundary, so that maybe things I'm raising are not relevant to this smaller part of the site.
Again, ma'am, I was going to say yes. There's a paddy. I think it identifies that there's a paddy pipe notation. I think there's a pipeline that runs close to the A558, the Daresbury linked road, and that basically impinged on the bottom end of the larger site. It's several, I think it's hundreds of meters away from the bottom end of this site, so it doesn't impinge.
And the pond, is that in this portion of the site? I think is it on the boundary, isn't it? Just highlight as potential contamination.
We'll check the map for you, ma'am. We'll submit that. I didn't quite manage to get it printed off last night, but we will submit that tonight. That'll show the location of the former pond.
Add to that, sorry, if it's the pond on the Runcorn Road frontage, or are we talking the one on the southern extent near the Daresbury Expressway?
As I say, my knowledge is coming from the site assessment form on the larger site, I think. Okay. So it may be something that
it's probably the one near the expressway then, which is a formal pond. The one that is probably centrally located on the site as a whole, but not within the current M8 allocation through our preliminary ecological assessment that has been undertaken for the site as a whole, was only identified as a seasonal pond. But again, it's
if I may assist Mr. Evans, just obviously not being party to some of the other sessions, it's a recurring theme that the site assessments tend to identify about. It seems to be 3% of each site is potentially contaminated. It's effectively, we've obviously assessed the sites against our potentially contaminated land register, which has identified an unfeasibly large number of former water features and ponds. We are planning to, we will submit the map to the examination library that shows the location of those. So if the site appraisal has identified potential contamination, it's liable to be a former filled-in water feature. But the mapping will show whether there is such a feature in the M8 site, or if it is purely located to the remainder of the site.
Okay, thank you. In terms of biodiversity, obviously, there's potential for habitats within trees and hedgerows around the site. Probably unlikely on the internal part of the site, though. Has any site assessment work been undertaken, Mr. Evans, in terms of biodiversity?
Yes, ma'am, it has. Again, as I just referenced, with reference to the sites as a whole, all the way down to the expressway, there are minimal levels of existing hedgerows, trees across the site. It's very open in nature, and those features that are existing could very comfortably retained in any wider master plan for the site as natural features.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other physical constraints that we need to be aware of?
Again, if I could just raise in terms of our master planning exercise, no physical features have been identified in terms of constraints, no scheduled ancient monuments or any such matters. I presume you're going to go on in terms of any other constraints for the site, but just for your information, we have undertaken flood risk assessment, drainage strategy. The the ecology assessment, highways assessment, and a landscape and visual impact assessment. So we have looked to address as many potential development management issues as possible.
Okay, thank you. And the flood risk assessment, there wasn't a particular issue, I believe, in relation to this site.
Correct. No, the site in its entirety is flood zone 1.
Yeah. And in terms of the accessibility of the site to services by public transport, walking and cycling, obviously it's reasonably close to the centre of Moor. What's the situation in relation to bus services into the larger settlement of Runcorn?
I'm happy.
Thank you.
Sorry, no.
Mr. Cross, do you want to go first?
I was only going to comment that I believe that some Boddington services do run down through the village into Sandymoor and into Runcorn and beyond. I think the assessments did identify there was a post office within the village. There's obviously a primary school just located basically immediately to the north of the site. There is a new local centre currently about to be under construction in Sandymoor, which is close to the site. As mentioned, say the linear park was provided as part of the Sandymoor 106 and does provide connections through to Sandymoor and the wider area. So we think, the site does benefit from a number of sustainable transport options.
Thank you. And in terms of education and health, you mentioned there's a primary school in Moor. Are there any capacity issues that you're aware of?
I'm not aware, but I'm happy to look that up for you. That will be listed in the appendix to our hearing statement. As I say again, though, however, just in the generality, there's sufficient capacity in the Runcorn area. Moor Primary School. Moor Primary School is identified on the list. It's currently showing as a capacity of 210 with a current rolling at December last year of 211. So it is actually one of the schools that is shown as being fully subscribed. Having said that, there's also other schools that are shown as being 120% subscribed. So it looks like it is a popular school. Whether it has capacity to take additional pupils, I would have to check with our school placement colleagues.
That would be useful, thank you. But as a whole, the Education Authority haven't asked particularly for contributions towards new school places across the borough as a whole.
No, and as I say, they have the reserve site for the school EDU1 at Sandymoor as part of the wider 106, and they haven't exercised the option to take up that site at present. They haven't there. So there was, whenever the free school was being proposed, there was an approach as to whether we would give up that reservation and allow that to go for the free school. They didn't feel that they wanted to do that. So basically they had the site reserved for a number of years and wanted to retain that just in case it was required. But at present we haven't taken it up because we haven't identified the requirement or a shortfall in the area.
Okay, thank you. And any specific health issues in relation to Moor in terms of capacity?
Not that I'm aware of, no. I think, the proposals for the Sandymoor Local Centre have previously included the potential to accommodate some health facilities. I'm not sure whether there's been a demand identified from the health providers to actually take up some of the accommodation that is now being provided, some of the new development that is being provided there. So I say no, I'm not aware of an outstanding unmet requirement.
Okay, thank you. And just moving on to highways, if I don't know if the highway colleagues are still with us in terms of the potential impact on the local road network. Obviously, it would be a fairly small scale development. Is Mr. Peake still with us?
Just about, Ma'am.
Yeah,
hanging on in there. No, a scheme of this modest nature that's shown within the red line plan that we've looked at. It's going to have little or no impact on the area in terms of wider or actually links onto the network. It's got site frontage, which means access can be taken. There's adopted footways in the network, which deals with pedestrian movements, and there doesn't seem to be any obstacles to development.
Okay, that's useful, thank you. And given the small scale of development, it'd be unlikely to be any effect on the strategic road network. Mr. Evans, have you had discussions with the Highways Authority or done any initial sort of transport assessment work?
Some initial transport assessment work has been undertaken, yes, and again with relation to the wider area, as well as specifically in terms of the allocation as currently being shown. As Mr. Peake has just referenced, the site currently benefits from a series of access points at various stages on Runcorn Road itself. In terms of our master planning exercise, we've identified appropriate positions in terms of points of access. So both from a site-specific perspective, it has been assessed in terms of highway safety and access, and from a wider strategic perspective in terms of the sustainability of the location, yes.
Okay, thank you. So in essence, from our discussion, there don't appear to be any particular physical or constraints or infrastructure requirements which would preclude the site coming forward.
No, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Just moving on to viability of the development. Obviously, this site typology would have been assessed through the whole plan viability assessment. Are there any viability issues from the developer's perspective that you're aware of, Mr. Evans?
No. Again, to provide a very simple answer, the site is in a single ownership. The site is being promoted by a well-established party, Liberty Properties, who are well experienced in such matters, and that viability assessment has clearly been undertaken as part of that process.
Okay, thank you. I mean, in terms of modifications, obviously, Mr. Evans, we have your position in terms of wanting the larger site included, and we've heard Mr. Cross's view on that as well. So I think just to sort of move on and wrap up the session, in terms of the anticipated start dates and an output on the site, we've just been asking at the end of each session for the developer to give the sort of best guesstimate, if you like, in terms of when the site's likely to come forward, taking into account lead in time for planning applications and site preparation, and to inform a potential start date and first completions on the site. Can you just sort of summarise, Mr. Evans, where your clients are in terms of sort of preparing planning applications, if at that stage?
Thank you, Ma'am. Yes, I'll try and keep it brief. As expressed, the site has a clear lead in terms of the land promoter, who are well experienced in such matters and have developed in excess of 500 units over the course of the last few years. So we feel we are very well placed in terms of deliverability. In terms of the planning process, as expressed, we've undertaken quite extensive background work on the site already since 2018 onwards, have started that dialogue to a certain degree with the local authority themselves, both Mr. Cross at the strategic level and officers at the application level. We are certainly in a position to be pursuing a pre-application advice request within the next 2 months, with a view to submission of an application within this calendar year. Expressions of interest are being put forward by a number of national house builders in terms of the development of the site, and all of those parties have expressed that they would be happy to actually undertake the detailed planning process and the physical development of the site within a shorter time frame as possible. So with a fair wind, you could argue the planning system and the process to one side, you could be as soon as the back end of 2022 to be ready to move forward on site.
Okay, thank you. It seems fairly optimistic with the planning application not in at present, but
well, as I said, with a fair wind, yeah.
So that would be a more optimistic view, really. And in terms of first completions, obviously we wouldn't be looking at a full output for 2022, it'd be towards the back end. Would that be actually starting on site, or would that be looking at your first completions actually on the ground?
I would say first completions would be more into 2023.
Right, okay. But potentially looking at the full year, a full sort of output for 2023, or?
Certainly, if you are taking an average, I know through listening to Mr. Cross on previous discussions, the council are working to a figure of 50 units per annum in terms of output on sites. Personally, feel that's a little optimistic. Certainly, from the experience with house builders, a figure more towards 30 is appropriate, but again, if you're only looking at a size for 20 units, yes, that would comfortably be done in a calendar year.
Okay, Mr. Cross, what's your view in terms of that? In terms of what Mr. Evans said, is it overly optimistic, or do you consider that to be realistic?
The SLA assumes 50 dwellings per hectare on sites over 150 units. I say in terms of sites of this size, of small sites would assume no more than about 20 units per annum. But just listening to Mr. Evans' evidence, I was jotting down that they would potentially be on site delivering units 2023, 24. So I just sort of scribbled down on my pad five completions in year one and 15 in the second year as being a reasonable assumption in terms of delivery. Obviously, the number that would be completed in year one would probably depend on what part of the year they actually started on site. So whether it was a full year or a part of the April to April monitoring year. So I assumed 5 and 15 as being a reasonable assumption.
You're assuming 2023 is year one?
As stated, he said they thought they could be generating units in 2023-24. I say in terms of the normal assumption for the SLA, given the site doesn't have the benefit of permission, a small site, we would assume a 7-year lead-in. So again, the dates are slightly a slightly closer or shorter time frame than we would envisage in the SLA. However, you have to have that a lot of the preparatory work has been undertaken to support the proposed allocation, and effectively, sounds like the planning application, the technical material is there and it's ready to go. So the fact that the developer feels comfortable that the site could be brought forward in shorter than 7 years seems entirely reasonable.
Okay, thank you. The development management team is going to be inundated with planning applications over the next year, by the sounds of it. Brilliant. Well, that's been very helpful. Thank you very much. So I think that wraps up my questions in terms of this particular site. Are there any other comments in relation to M8? Mr. Evans, have you said what you wanted to say?
No, ma'am. Thank you for your time. Yeah, I think we've got you've got an understanding of where we're at in terms of the consideration of a wider area, but we appreciate that's not something that you can address in too great a detail today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you for your contributions, Mr. Evans. I think ourselves and the council's team will be having a well-earned break over the weekend, but we'll be back on Monday morning to consider the sites in Daresbury. Mr. Cross, Mrs. Donnelly mehighlighted the SUV, the HSC. So I think certainly I'm going to discuss potential. I think there may be potential. We did sort of set out our situation, but I think there may be potential to hold a separate session. So I'm just going to discuss with Mr. Try if there's any scope in any leeway in the timetable to accommodate that, if that's acceptable to yourselves. But we'll email through Lynn to discuss that. But I'm conscious Lynn's on holiday tomorrow, so I think if we can resolve that today, that would be good. Okay, then, well, thanks very much for your contributions. Thank you. Have a good weekend.